Okay, I'm just going to start with who's here, and as everybody moves in, they can catch up. But I know they can hear from outside too. We are really, again, fortunate and blessed to have esteemed colleagues who work in the area of the same thing we do, Hawaiian culture-based education, and believe in it. And so let me share a little bit about each one. We'll start with Dr. Kamana Beamer, who's like beaming in right now from far away. Hi, dear. Oh, my kai. Okay. Aloha. Aloha. So this is Dr. Kamana Maikalani Beamer. He's a full professor in the Hui Aloha Kalamai Hui Aina Momona program at the University of Hawaii, Manoa. He serves a dual appointment in the Hawaii Nui Akea School of Hawaiian Knowledge and the William S. Richardson School of Law as part of Kahuliau's Center for Excellence in Native Hawaiian Law. Dr. Beamer's research interests and publications focus on indigenous agency, governance, Native Hawaiian land tenure, Hawaiian resource management, and land and resource law of the Hawaiian Kingdom. For the past 5 years, Dr. Beamer has been researching the circular economy in partnership with colleagues from the University of Augsburg. This international knowledge exchange has guided recent work exploring how Aloha Aina as an indigenous philosophy and the circular economy as a modern economic approach can inform each other in enacting systemic economic change and transitioning to sustainable societies. Dr. Kamana Beamer is one of the 14 co-founders of Aina Aloha Economic Futures, an initiative with the goal of economic recovery efforts. In August 2021, he began serving a 5-year appointment as the inaugural Dana Naune Hall Endowed Chair in Hawaiian Studies, Literature, and the Environment. In 2014, Beamer published No Mako Kamana, Liberating the Nation, which received multiple awards, including the Samuel M. Kamakau Book of the Year Award from the Hawaii Book Publishing Association. This is Dr. Kamana Beamer. And let's go all the way over to that side. This is Tatiana Fox, who is from Honolulu, Ewa Oahu. She is a passionate educator, inspired by tradition and ignited by innovation. She's the middle daughter of Kumuhula Iwalani Seu and has continued their family legacy as the Kumuhula of Nalei o Ka'iwa Ha'a Ikalani. Her Western education includes a BA in Hawaiian Studies with a minor in Sociology, an MED in Curriculum Studies, and an MED in Educational Foundations focused on private school leadership. Tati has worked for Kamana Schools for over 20 years and has served in various roles, from classroom teacher to administrator and instructional design and development coach. She is currently a senior project manager in the Kamana Schools Oiwi Leadership Institute in the Hi'ialo Group, whose purpose is fostering transformative leadership by developing an Oiwi lens. Mahalo, Tati.
Aloha. Aloha.
Kalamai, let me make my way over to here. Paulo Burns, who was raised on the Big Island of Hawaii in Puna, Paia'ala i Kahala. He graduated from the University of Hawaii at Hilo with his bachelor's degree in agriculture in 1996. In 2000, he graduated from the Hawaiian Medium Teacher Training Program called Kahua Vaiola. He also graduated with his master's in Indigenous Language and Culture Education from Kahakaula o Ke'elikolani College of Hawaiian Language in 2020. He was prepared to teach Hawaiian immersion schools at Hawaiian immersion schools as well as Hawaiian medium schools. Navahi o Kanaʻiaupuni is where Paulo did his student teaching. Paulo taught at Kanaʻiaupuni Charter School the first year they opened up in 2000. He moved to Hana Maui with his wife in 2001 and worked at Hana School from that year till 2017. He helped a lot to get the Punana Leo Ohana and the Kulakai Puni Ohana started in 2016. taught first grade at the Kanaʻiaupuni Ohana for 4 years. I'll give you credit for that. At this time, he is a Hawaiian studies teacher from preschool to high school for the charter school in Laupahoehoe, Hawaii. Within his 20-plus years of teaching experience, he has clearly seen the great benefit of Hawaiian language and culture education and the consequences of when it is lacking. Mahalo, Paulo, for joining us. Next to Tatiana is Dr. Shawn Kanaʻiaupuni, who is from Pupukea, Oahu, and is a proud KS alumna. She serves as President and Chief Executive Officer of Partners in Development Foundation, a local Hawaiian nonprofit organization that serves vulnerable youth and families across the state, managing more than $18 million in grants, contracts, and donations annually. Dr. Kanaʻiaupuni has more than 20 years of experience in collaboratively mobilizing public, private, and community-based agencies towards positive educational outcomes for Native Hawaiian children. At Kamana School, she managed and implemented several initiatives, including launching its research evaluation division, overseeing public education and charter school programs. All this is relevant because then you really believe that she knows what she's talking about. Okay, I know. I don't want to skip over too much of it because it is, like I said, relevant, but she got to catch a plane at 1:30. She got to leave at 1:30. So we will move over to our questions, if you don't mind. But this is Dr. Shawn Kanaʻiaupuni. I always say Shawn gets me the best parking spaces because somehow our names get mixed up. So when they tell me, oh, Kanaʻiaupuni, I'm like, yes, and they give me the parking space.
It happens.
Yeah.
It literally happens.
So, we're just going to jump into this because this is all about debunking Hawaiian culture-based education myths. Because we've heard it all. We've heard it all about what we think Hawaiian culture-based education is. And we invited these four esteemed scholars and workers in the Lahui to share their mana'o on these different points. So some people think HCBE is all hands-on. Some think it's not academically rigorous. To clarify, what is Hawaiian culture-based education? And any of you can start. Where do you want to start? Paulo, why don't we start with you? Okay.
Aloha mai kako. It's Hawaiian culture-based education has a huge gamut of variations, and they all have relevance and positive outcomes. One example was when I was in elementary school in Mountain View on the Big Island, a kumu had come and taught us hula kahiko for May Day. And that had a huge impact on me and some of my classmates. And so sometimes even small amounts of Hawaiian culture-based education can change a person's route where they're going to go. I've seen other examples, such as the Kanaʻiaupuni movement in the Big Island. And then when they first started, it was more just the language was the main priority. And then later when the Hawaiian charter schools opened up, the culture was more the priority than the language, because a lot of times they were doing cultural-based education, but the language wasn't, they didn't have fluent speakers to teach the kids. So the kids were graduating with a lot of cultural understanding and whatnot, but they didn't have the language. And then when you look at the Hawaiian medium education model, which Navahi and Punaleo have set the pathway where they've created a philosophy called Kumuhonua Mauliola, when they really look at the education as aligning all their piko I, O, and A, integrating as much cultural knowledge, traditional knowledge, behaviors, spirituality into the school. So it wasn't just about the language, it was about the whole, as much possible, the Hawaiian culture integrated. And from my experience, and also my experience in Hana School, was I came there as a third grade teacher, and I took my knowledge and did Hawaiian culture-based education the best I could, and it did have a major impact. But then it had a much greater impact when we started the Hawaiian medium pathway. And now it's in its 7th year. The quality of the student is just unbelievable. The amount of pride, the amount of strength, and the amount of not being ashamed of who they are, being able to perform in front of a group, speak in front of a group, and them knowing their language has a great advantage. So there's very great points in all different Hawaiian culture-based education, lots of different models, and there's plenty more, but I'll just stop at that one. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui. I'm going to ask you, Shawn, since you're going to have to leave early, give us your manaʻo because this really is your question.
Oh, it's my question. Well, and I'll apologize for some of you who are with our earlier session because we talked a little bit about that, and I agree with everything that was just said as real examples of what is culture-based education. And if culture is a group's ways of knowing, being, and doing, then teaching and learning through a culture-based lens is about teaching approaches, learning and teaching through a group's knowledge, values, beliefs, practices, places, language of that particular indigenous group or cultural group. And we talked about how it could be Jewish culture-based education. You see Jewish schools. It could be Japanese. You definitely see Japanese immersion schools. You could definitely Native Hawaiian. But in very simple form, that's one definition.
Mahalo, Tati.
Aloha nui kako, kako oau, ya lawane. When we think of culture-based education, it's about from that culture. And I think it could be as simple as that, from that perspective. And the beginning part of your ninau, Anake, around hands-on is not academically rigorous. I challenge that, right? That's what we're here to say, debunking these myths that hands-on is not. And so we have to ask ourselves, well, why not? And so then is then only cognitive and cerebral thinking and all of those things that come in that space, is that the only thing that we consider to be rigorous? Because theory is theory until you put it into practice, right? So makahana ka ike. So without actually getting into it, without that hands-on, without actually taking the knowledge that you have in theory and putting it into practice, whatever the context may be, and I'm not just coming from a practitioner lens as a kumuhula, but also as an educator. You are a practitioner. So everybody raise your hand. Come on, everybody nice and high. Even if you're a grounds worker here, and say, I am a kumu.
I am a kumu.
Like for real, like, hey, kumu vau. Oh, there we go. Right, you are a source. Your source of ike is valuable. You have value, and you have a practice. And so in doing that, in engaging in that practice, that's rigorous. You know, by thinking about how is it that I can either sustain this practice and teach it on, and or what do I need to do to maybe ho'oka'oi and to refine and to bring in people to even challenge me in how can I do this different and come up with different iterations of it. Malaila no ka rigor, right? There is the rigor in that. So, you know, reading that question that is hands-on, or some people think that Hawaiian culture-based education is only hands-on. It is not only hands-on. At the same time, hands-on is rigorous.
Absolutely. Mahalo. Kamana.
Yeah, kakaurui wau, ya o ko pakahi, mahalo ni mo kia kono, aloha mai kako. Thank you, everybody. Support everything that's being said. I think a lot about kilo. You know, I think about kilo, observation, and that, seeing what's around you, taking the time, listening, reflecting, no. I think about, that leads you to pilina, thinking about your relationships with what you see around you, with who you see around you, with who helped you to be in the spaces that you're at. And I think about aloha, you know, then you get that pilina, then you get that action. Aloha I, kekahi, you know, aloha I ka aina. I mean, then you apply, right? And it's that kind of reciprocal, you know. Sometimes hands-on is when to keep hands off. Nanakamaka, aloha ka pepiao, you know. You don't just touch, make any kind. So super rigorous, I think. You know, at least in my life and spaces, no way I would be doing the things I'm doing if it wasn't for our kupuna, if it wasn't for Ike kupuna, you know. So, yeah, kako.
Mahalo. You know, Tati, you talked about Ike Hawaii being valuable, and so maybe if you can just touch on maybe a couple things, each of you, in what ways is Ike Hawaii and HCBE valuable to the success of our haumana? Remembering that our haumana are all Hawaiian haumana. So why don't we start with you, Shawn?
Well, yeah, because I forgot to answer the second part of that question, the academic rigor, so thank you for addressing it. What is valuable? I mean, if we look at what the research shows, and there's mounting research across the globe about indigenous and culture-based education, and the work that we've done here in Hawaii shows that when you look at across public and private and charter schools, across teachers from all different ethnic backgrounds, across students from all different backgrounds, which we have done in empirical research, the students of teachers who consistently and rigorously use culture-based educational approaches have the kinds of outcomes that include greater socio-emotional connection, belonging, aspirations in their educational journey, expectations to graduate from college, connection to community and ohana, and sense of belonging at the school. So those are the kinds of things that make our Ike Kupuna extremely valuable. Luckily, you have an Aola learner outcome about that, right? But I guess, you know, what we've heard, you know, works at a na'au level that we know, you know, kind of from our ancestral knowledge and values also bears out in the empirical data. And so that's, you know, from some people, they want to hear that story first. So the other, you know, others want to hear more about the sense of purpose and belonging and meaning that our Ike Kupuna gives young people, and all of us, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's tag team me, okay. What do we define as success? I think that when I hear that question, I think about that too. And listening, I was able to come in a little earlier and hear Kanaʻiaupuni and the first panel talk. And I think about first, how are we defining success for our haumana? What is that nu'u or what is that destination that we are aiming for? Because as was shared by Auntie Kahele, like different generations, different period in our history, there was a goal for what education was and what it meant to be successful. And I sit here in front of you today as a keiki who started off in attended a Baptist church preschool and went to another private school. And my mother was a part of the DOE kupuna program, and she was the youngest kupuna probably at that time, not even a kupuna makua, who was fortunate to work with kupuna meatonga, kupuna kawahi paulama, and literally pulled us out of that system and put us into ke kula Kaiapuni o Waiau. And then came from Kaiapuni to Kamehameha. And so I sit here before you today, and I'm still asking myself, what is success? And what is successful as for the haumana? As a kupa o keia aina o Hawaii, success for me is being first a great representation of my own ohana, and making sure that my keiki are also understanding of our own velo ohana and our own family loina. And so when I think about, okay, so what does it mean to be a successful haumana? Do we know our keiki? Do we know them? Do we know the communities they come from? Do we know their ohana? Because we know that there's also lots of history, lots of ike, but also lots of trauma that have come within our own communities. And how are we aware of that? And then how are we using our pilina with our keiki and their ohana to really be that space of healing And when I think of Ike Hawaii then having value to the success of our haumana, it's not just how many graduates are we seeing. Yes, I would love to see thousands, hundreds of thousands of Hawaiians PhD. I think that was like, I'm looking at Kamana, and I remember seeing them at Kamakoku. Remember where Lili Kalama would put them all over the windows. We want, 100,000 PhDs. And, I'm on my way. I'm not there yet. But I also know that's not the only definition of success, right? How do we look at every single keiki and speak life into that keiki? How do we make sure that everybody is able to follow their passion and their gift and their genius, as what Kehau Abad shared, that you have a gift. We had kapa makers, we had kalai, we had kuhi pueone, we had navigators, we had, different fields, and be the best in that field. So when I think about what's the value of Ike Hawaii into the success of the haumana, well, it's giving them that pilina, giving them that identity, knowing that it's not about being good enough. It is oi kela kela and beyond, right? Poi Poi said that. It's beyond. So then that way they feel that success can be defined by themselves, that they define their success. We are there to kahu them. We are there to make sure that they're supported. We are there to counsel them. We are there to maybe, okay, we'll see. Maybe you should have went that other alanui. But we are also there to pai them. We are also there to encourage them, so then that way they feel successful and that they're not in that space where we see that trauma keep coming back over and over again. Oia ihola.
Mahalo nui. Kamana?
Yeah, I talk about that, what is the need we're trying to reach as educators. And I really mahalo what Tati said, makes me reflect. I'm a generation never had Hawaiian focused charter school. I'm just a little bit too old. Never have immersion. My friend Kaliko Maiti, who I play music with, I think he was one of the first, and he's 4 years younger than me. So I just would miss the whole huakai. But yet I think even not being in those schools, I went public schools. There's a long story there. Eventually I made my way to Kamana. But I think the success of Hawaiian culture-based education, Ike Hawaii is when, I will bring one Hawaii Island story. First time I ever saw tutu pele. It was in the 80s, Kalapana was burning. And my tutu got some friends to bring us in on VW bug. And we were out in the middle of the night, and I remember smelling. The first thing was the smell, the sulfur, before I could see. And eventually I saw like that glowing antenna coming down kind of the slopes towards Kalapana. And I remember my tutu saying, you know what that is? Mana boy, that's noke. That's tutu pele. And she's gonna noke. Nothing can stop. Nothing can get in front. She go move around. She go burn them. And she's like, that's what we gotta do. In our hana is to noke. And so I think success is when our haumana not to give up. And whether it's in college, a real marker of success in college is just that grit. That confidence to know, hey, I can, or yeah, I'm gonna pause on this, but I'm moving in another direction. And so I think that Ike Hawaii, those lessons and those relationships build that grit, that view bullying. So
the last 20 plus years of graduates out of the Hawaiian charter schools and immersion schools has proven that they're very, very successful in every way of life. First of all, their ano, their spirit is so grounded in who they are that they're very mature at a young age. They know how to act. They're not trying to seek to find out who they are into their 30s and 40s. And whatever they do, they're very successful at. I mean, they go into every single field. We know that plenty have gotten their doctorate degrees. Some have gone into every field you can imagine, but they bring their perspective of who they are, knowing who they are, and because they have that drive and that spirit is alive in them, they can accomplish anything. And that's the true success, because we fed the maoli, the spirit, and helped them know who they are, that anything is possible for them. And that is the true success, I believe, that is shown because of our great love that we've shown to the keiki, and them meeting the aina, the mo'olelo, everything they know about who they are, that they love themselves so much that they wouldn't go down the path of substance abuse or violence, because they know that that's not who they are, and that's not their kuleana. So all the myths of Hawaiian culture-based education have already been disproven with all the graduates we've seen come out. I know that Kamehameha looks for Kanaʻiaupuni graduates because they know they're some of the best. Mahalo.
Oh, let's give God a You know, earlier you talked about the DNA, and I always say that the DNA gets reawakened with HCBE. You know, when we get our students, so many times we get so much PD in Ike Hawaii that we actually know more than our students about what it is to be Hawaiian, because they're coming from parents who have lost that and grandparents who have lost it. So it becomes our kuleana to really give them that opportunity, the opportunities in every space on this campus to awaken that DNA to something that's so familiar that they feel so proud and safe in knowing that, you know? So having said that, how important is it for our staff? And we're gonna just point right at us, yeah? How important is it for our staff to have a kuana ike Hawaii, a Hawaiian perspective? And how can it be developed? And I guess we're gonna start with you, Kamana.
Yeah, ko'ilo. I think it's critical, and I think a part of that is being open and honest with your haumana, you know, the things you don't know and the things you do know, and showing that oia'i'o, that vulnerability, you know, to give them the courage and the space to grow. And man, you know, my teacher said, you know, there's nothing more important than education, and the best way to teach is by example. You know, how, and I know everyone in this room knows this, you know, how we carry ourselves and how we approach it. And yeah, it's not necessarily just about meeting rubric benchmarks. So how can it be developed? You know, spend time with our people, get involved with, you know, aina movements, justice, olelo, lauhala, pick so many options. But I think immerse yourself in something that you have that i'i for, and then you're gonna love to share, you know. And like me, I'm the worst lauhala. I tried to take anti-miles, ma'avi no ea. That was rough. So I know that's not my space, but I have some things to offer. So I think it's just being honest about that.
Mahalo. Paulo?
You know, it's, as an educator, we want to give the best to our keiki, and we don't want to give them mediocre. So even when I went back to become a Hawaiian immersion first grade teacher, I didn't feel like my language was at the par that it should be. So that's why I went back to get my master's in Indigenous language culture education, because I want to make sure that they get the highest exposure to language as possible, so that when they become fluent speakers, that they're speaking at the highest proficient level, not just at a mediocre or low level. And so I push myself, and even I'm constantly looking up more information, calling people. Every time I'm doing lessons, I want to be well prepared, so that, and like, I agree that we are vulnerable, that we don't know everything. We're on this path, and sometimes we know a little bit more than the keikis, so we have something to share with them, but we're always, and we have everything at our fingertips. We have no excuse other than not trying or not wanting to or not making the time. So we can.
Mahalo.
Right.
Shawn? Oh, okay, Tati.
Okay. How many of you are KS employees? Yeah, I know we are the after lunch crowd, right? So I'm trying to also get you engaged here, yeah? Okay, we're doing a little body kinesthetic stuff, okay? Come on, one more time. How many of you are a KS employee? Raise it up. Hi, nice and high. Okay, maybe some of you aren't, and you, aloha, maybe you're a presenter, welcome. You may know, because you're at campus programs, that our AOLA learner outcomes are what we want for our learners, our graduates. Also know that in our Strategic Map 2025, AOLA is called out as our enterprise's identity. I'm gonna let that sit for a moment. Our enterprise is not just our campuses. It's our non-educational groups as well. Communications, legal, HR, administration, who am I missing? Land assets, commercial real estate, and so on and so on and so on. All of our executive leaders, all of the groups are now also building their understanding in Kanaʻiaupuni, Hawaii through AOLA. And so when we ask ourselves, how important is Kanaʻiaupuni, Hawaii? It is very important. One, because you as an employee of Kamehameha Schools have chosen this field to educate Kanaka, young Hawaiian students, in an organization that has made a commitment to say that AOLA is not just for our haumana, it's for us, each and every one of us. And so how do you develop an identity? I'm gonna have you just think about that for like 10 seconds. How is an identity formed? It's experiences, it's your groups, the various social constructs that make you who you are today, and we've all shifted and shaped throughout our years by everything that we've been exposed to. And it brought us to this point right here. I am sitting here still questioning, like, why am I on this panel? Like, I just have so much aloha for these guys. And at the same time, I mahalo my kupuna for creating those pathways to allow me to be here right now in this moment. And know that in order to develop a Kanaʻiaupuni, you have to experience that space from the lens of those you are here really to serve. We are here to serve our keiki. And so are we aware of their life, their perspectives? And that's what Kanaʻiaupuni is. You know, Kanaʻiaupuni, I looked it up and it shows up in Mamaka Kaiau, which tells me that it is not a traditional term, right? It is a kuana, a position of ike, of knowledge. In other words, I translate that to, it comes from an informed space. Now, when we think of perspective, we think of sometimes what's happening over there and looks different because I'm looking at it from over here and looking at it from this way. But when we look at it from Kanaʻiaupuni, I'm actually coming from now an informed space. I've taken the time to go in and learn and get involved, and I can now go from there. And how is it developed? Yes, like Kamana said, get into a practice. Some of you are like, I don't know about lauhala weaving. And it doesn't necessarily have to just be Hawaiian kind things, right? There's more than just the arts. There's even, look at the way that our government was run. That's a Kanaʻiaupuni, that's a perspective that can be developed. And even kind of like, again, piggybacking on Kamana, I was in that Ma'ave class. My first pale lauhala looked like more like one kite. It wasn't really a square. But the attention to detail from Ma'ave, from Ulana Lauhala, can be translated into attention to detail in an English classroom. It can be translated into attention to detail in a staff meeting. What is your intention for that meeting? Do you have a kumuhana? Do you have a learning target in your class? What's the function that you need to, what's the role you need to be in order to get towards that kumuhana? And that all is part of developing that Kanaʻiaupuni based from our practices. Even if you're looking at your mala, I think of Uncle Jerry, you command that loa'a. He would say, people say, olu kamea loa'a. Oh, well, you better command that loa'a. You better say, you will give me one big kalo. Yeah, you put that in, you manifest that, you set that intention. So Is it important for all of us? And I say all of us, knowing that I'm not in a room of those of us who are just Hawaii. How many of you have ancestors that come from other places other than Hawaii? I'm gonna raise maybe my 2 hands and even my feet if I could, right? So we all here now live here in Hawaii, so it is all of our kuleana. Last week at the CNHA convention, when we give kuleana, we empower people and we elevate the mana. So now we all have kuleana. Your mana is now lifted up because our Keiki Hawaii needs you to also then tap into that and say, what can I do? What can I do? What can I learn this week, this month, this year? What's the next step for me? And then how do I bring that ike into the context that I'm in? Because no, we do not expect you to teach lauhala weaving in English, but we can use the principles of that in the way in which you engage with your haumana.
So I love all the answers and definitely kako, everything that's been said. And I don't want to tell you what to do about understanding a native Hawaiian perspective and how important that is. So I'll just ask you, how intimately connected are you to the community? Where are you deeply embedded so that you can gain that understanding for yourself? Because if you don't know why it's important, you should have an answer, right? How do you do your own research? I think that was a point that was raised earlier. I hear people say, why are those Hawaiians always so mad? They're always protesting. And do you understand that Hawaiians, our Kanaka Maoli, are walking around with historical trauma because of a history of colonization and occupation and what that does to people genetically, right? We talked about it earlier in the session before. It's biological. It actually can be traced through genetic transmission. And then, how do you as educators understand your role in teaching Native Hawaiian haumana who are from this homeland, the only homeland of Native Hawaiians, about their role in it? And that's all part of having a Native Hawaiian perspective. And so I just ask you to maybe reflect on those questions for yourself so that you can answer that question too.
I'm going to skip the next question because I think you've done a great job at answering it. Hello, I have a mic. Well, I'm skipping the next question because they did a good job at answering it, I think. So I'm going to go to the last one. What is the role of non-Hawaiians in supporting advancing Hawaiian culture-based education? Knowing that this morning when Kaleikoa spoke, he said, that's not his kuleana. But I think here, we do want to know, I think, some of us who are not Hawaiian, how do we engage in this space, right? When we have to teach Hawaiian culture-based education. I just got here 2 days ago to Hawaii. You want me to what? And I think, I'll just insert my own mana'o. You wanted to come here, okay, this is the school you landed in, So there is a kuleana. There are people to kokua you here. But we wanted you guys to respond to this. What do you think about that question? What's the role of non-Hawaiians in supporting advancing Hawaiian culture-based education? Go ahead, Paulo.
I should go first since I'm probably the only non-koko here. Being raised in Hawaii and having a passion for the culture and the people and the language and then choosing to be educated, to train, to work with our keiki, has shown that you can make a difference whether you have the koko or not. And even if you're not comfortable with the language or the culture, there's lots of ways to support. And I truly believe one of the biggest impacts I've seen is culture exchange. When our haumana, when I took them to the Big Island for a week, I did that for several years. I would take them to visit all the Hawaiian immersion schools and the UH Hilo, and different places, and we'd protocol in, we would do ho'okupu, we would pule, we would do as much protocols and stuff as we could. And even as a non-Hawaiian, you can be that kako'o. And also one thing is just to feed their maoli, their spirit, because that's the most important thing, for the kids to know that they're loved and that someone cares about them. That is the number one thing. If they don't have that, academics don't mean anything. because they're not going to be driven to even want to do academics. And I've seen that time and time again, where they're super smart kid but had no drive. Their spirit was just dark, just not shining at all. So everyone has a place to kako'o, but the ones that were raised here and in the communities have the most ike, the kuana ike, because you know the people the most and have the most impact. And the ones that don't know need to, like Tati said, need to get involved in the communities, and Kanaʻiaupuni as well, that need to understand where they're coming from, because it's hard to do that if you don't get involved and see their perspectives and be compassionate and be part of the solution and not part of the problem. Mahalo.
That's a really great question. I'll just tell you from the research standpoint real quick that we found across 600 kumu in different settings, like I said before, that practitioners, teachers that were using a high degree of culture-based education in their teaching and instruction based on their own assessment ranged the full gamut of race and ethnicity. So you don't have to be Hawaiian to deliver culture-based education. You do have to learn and know and make friends in the community so that you can draw on experts and cultural resources and kupuna voices, but you don't have to be Hawaiian yourself. And I'm always very grateful for the many non-Hawaiian folks who made it possible for us to be where we are today with our language and culture and mele and so many other ways of contributing. That said, I do think there's a particular role where you want to be cognizant of your place in the room and how you rebalance power dynamics and create greater equity of voice and expression. Sometimes, the non-Kanaka voices will feel the pressure to speak before being asked, maybe to. I'm not saying that's happened here, but maybe instead of listening, to give their mana'o. And so when you're new, if you've just arrived, and that's something that people have to learn, that place on the table. And the other thing that I also worry about in the expression of non-Kanaka and the role is know when to advocate for and against. Know when to advocate for our people and against cultural appropriation and the misuse of our culture and the way that it's portrayed in the tourist industry and in Hawaii as destination paradise that really masks who we are as Kanaka Maoli. And so help shine a spotlight on that, because you can talk to people in ways that sometimes some of us can't. You can make those relationships and those connections to folks who might not understand a Hawaiian, why a Hawaiian is saying this or that, or what the real deal is. You can say it in a different way. So your kuleana, in fact, as a non-Hawaiian, is to advocate and support.
Mahalo.
Earlier, I asked how many of you have ancestors from elsewhere. We all raised our hands, right? And we're here today, right? Our kupuna from wherever they came from came here today. My story of one of my kupuna, who is pure Pake, pure Chinese, my dad's father, who actually did not know who his birth parents were, and he lived with his aunt who took him in Kaka'ako, and they had a Chinese store, and above them they rented out some of the rooms, and just so happened that there was a man, Charles Kealoha, who was there, wasn't married, was a holomoana, was a sailor, and kind of did his thing in the harbors, came into Kaka'ako, and he took in my grandfather. And everything my grandfather knows about Lawai'a came from Tutu Kealoha. My grandfather, pure Pake. And he taught that ike to my father, who they would go around Oahu, and he knew when to go for certain seasons. This is where you go, son. He knew, okay, when you go, this is where you go. And again, pure Chinese. But he was given that opportunity to develop his ike, his kuana ike Hawaii. So as Kumu Ekela shared, that for those who are not Hawaii in koko, and you're here, I'm going to say it's not about koko. It's about your perspective. And we can go back to history where there were many non-Hawaiians that did great things for our lahui because they had aloha for this space. And if you aloha this space and our keiki, then you will know when to, I'm gonna step back. I'm gonna make sure that they ho'omau. I'm gonna be here, I'm going to kako'o, and I'm also gonna continue to engage and learn as much as I can, because society and history has pinned that space. We are one of the only, I think, the only ethnicity that has blood quantum to be able to access certain things, right? You know, that this much, I'm this much more than you, or this much that, and you know, we as a even Kanaka have to reconcile with those kinds of constructs. And I would argue that there are some Kanaka who don't have the ike or the kuana ike. And I think of actually an Aotearoa, an educator from Aotearoa that was, you know, more in the language space, but said, why te reo Māori if you have nothing te reo Māori to say? You know, why speak Olelo if you have nothing Olelo Hawaii to say? And so it goes both ways. It is for those who are not Hawaii, but also for those of us who are Hawaii. There's a lot of shifting that we have to do even for our own people, to bring them back to the aina, to bring back that, to reawaken that ancestral ike that's within our DNA, in our EV. And so know that it's not just non-Hawaiian against Hawaiian, or whose kuleana is it more. It's all. It's all. We are inclusive. And one last mo'olelo that came from CNHA, I forgot the guy's name, but he said, you know, his kupuna came from somewhere actually here in Kahului, didn't, you know, 14 years old, didn't wanna, you know, couldn't make it here, ended up, I think, in Ke'anai or something, was taken in by an Ohana Hawaii. And this person was on a panel of talking about housing, the housing crisis here in Hawaii, and about the houseless issue on Oahu specifically. And he said, how did we get from a couple of generations ago where an immigrant could come to Hawaii, find his way all the way to Ke'anai, be taken in by an Ohana Hawaii, learned how to Olelo Hawaii, and when he was about 18, 19, came back to Kahului and met his lovely wife, who then, you know, they have now this beautiful Ohana. How did we get disconnected from that as a people? You know, and again, we each have our story. Each Ohana has their story. But think about that too. Those of us who are Hawaii, Kumu Ekele said, we're here for you. Yeah, we need more of us to also say, yes, we're here for you. That kuleana can also be kaumaha. I know that, right? That's the burden that we sometimes take on, or chooses us to take on, to make sure that we are inclusive in the ways that we engage, and then at the same time, so without watering it down and holding folks accountable to the ike and the experiences that we're providing. So I see that question more as it's all of us, Kanaka, and those who are coming over and joining us in this. Mahalo.
Mahalo. Kamana?
Yeah, kaka'o everything. I think allyship is a real thing. You know, we, at least I believe, you know, aina is our kupuna, and you know, if you love my kupuna, doesn't mean you're her grandchild like I am, but it does mean we family, right? And we can work together, and there's so many examples of that Tati and others have shared. If you want specifics, you can, in my book, No Mako Kamana, I talk about the way Hawaii changed, you know, non-Hawaiians that eventually became Hawaiian nationals. I think positionality and privilege, you know, interrogate your own privilege. We need help fighting white supremacy in Hawaii. Asian settler colonialism is a real thing. And And I think having that vulnerability and that courage, just like us as Hawaiians, evaluating where we're at in our practice, in our relationships to each other, having the courage to do that for yourself. But that's an important role. I agree with Shawn that, sometimes non-Hawaiians can say and do things in certain spaces with less repercussions or none. Whereas a Hawaiian, I've experienced some of this, there's fallout. And so I believe it's an inside-outside thing, it's a collaborative thing. My keiki have great kumu that, are non-Hawaiians, so there's great teachers all across, but I think that vulnerability, that oiai'o, that honesty is really critical and important.
Mahalo nui. I have a story too, and I'm sure many of you have heard of it, but my high school teacher, Hawaiian language teacher, was Haole. She was from Czechoslovakia by way of Louisiana. And she told, I remember being really anti, every time I looked at her, I was like, ugh, I was 15 with an attitude. And raised in Hawaiian language, so I knew what it was supposed to sound like, I knew how it was supposed to be, and she wasn't it. Until we had a moment, the two of us came together, she told me, we need to talk, and I knew it was gonna come, right? And she said, I'm just holding a space. I'm holding a space for you, because you need to do this. And I ended up where I am today. I always remember this woman, because she made a change, she made a difference in my life. So it isn't, you're right, it's not about the koko, it's about how do you feel? How do you make that difference? Where are you coming from? And so we appreciate everyone who's here, but just in case you came to Hawaii just for a vacation, we're watching you, okay? Because really, this school, we've made a turn. It's hulihia time, gang. We're turning it around, and we're waking people up, as you saw this morning, very different. We're in a different space today, and we're saying we need everybody here to be on their game and playing the same game, yeah? And we brought all of these people in here to come share with us today so that we can get ourselves ready, get ourselves makoko, be in a place where when we walk in those classrooms with our kids, we're not gonna just see that keiki standing in front of us, we're gonna see the line of kupuna that stands behind them, that prayed for them, that cried for them, that went through hell for them. That's who we see in front of us. And we owe them for all those kupuna to do the best that we can, to help them to find the beauty of who they are as Kanaka Maoli. And that's all of us together. Imagine if we do this, what our lahui can look like, the change that could happen. That's on us. So, I'm so excited about the direction we're headed this year. We have good things to do, we have good work to do, and we got a lot of good people now in this school who are ready to kokua, do what we need, hold us accountable. Give us a call, email, do whatever you have to do to get us to kokua you if you need it and tell us what you need so we can do it, do the work together. Mahalo nui to all of you, our panelists, Kamana, Paulo, Shawn, Tati, for the good work they're doing. Keep it up.
If I can say one more thing, so our school's motto, Imua. So let's say that one together. Ready, go. Imua. Mahalo. Imua e nā poki I ainu I ka wai ava ava. It didn't say go drink the nice refreshing water. It said the wai ava ava. A'ohe hope ho'i mai ai. Nobody said this road was going to be easy, and if you are an educator, you got in this knowing that it wasn't going to be easy. You came here because you were passionate about education. And so continue to think of it in the words of Kamehameha, Imua, Imua kako. Mahalo.
Imua. Just know that when that was said, he was telling his warriors, unlash all the riggings on this va'a. Take it all apart, because we ain't coming back here to do this again. We're done, this is it.
Yep.
So that's where we at, gang. Imua.
Imua.
Mahalo. And you're on your way to your breakout sessions. Mahalo Kamana.
Mahalo, Kamana.
Mahalo, Kamana.
Ai, Kamana.
Aloha.
Ahui ho.